The cellar was not built for a man, it was built for preserving things, root vegetables, salted meat, the harvest that would keep through winter. Yet in the spring of 1847, Colonel Thaddeus Rutledge had another purpose for it. He wanted the room to keep something else fresh, his shame, his cruelty, and his secret. They dragged Silas down the narrow steps while he was still bleeding from the lashes. His pale skin, almost white even before the punishment, glowed faintly in the lamplight, as if reflecting the horror of every face around him. The air below was wet and heavy, thick with the smell of stone and mildew. When they chained him to the wall, one of the men laughed, a short, nervous sound that didn't last long. Even then, even broken and trembling, Silas had looked at them in a way that made their laughter die. The door slammed, the lock turned, darkness swallowed him whole. For the first few days he screamed until his throat was raw. The cellar devoured the sound, turning it into a low hum that reverberated against the walls like a heartbeat. No one came. When the door finally opened, it was only to slide in a tin plate and a small bucket of water. He tried to speak, to ask why, to plead, but his voice had withered into a whisper, and the man who fed him never looked at his face. Silas learned quickly that the cellar had no mercy. The cold seeped into his bones, the damp made every breath taste of rust, and the silence became a living thing that crept into his thoughts. He marked the passing days with scratches on the wall, 7 to a row, but after a time the weeks and months blurred together. Seasons turned above him, unseen, only guessed by the changes in temperature that leaked through the stones. He no longer imagined escape, he only waited. The body changes in darkness. At first, Silas grew thin, his muscles wasting, but the years stretched on and something within him adapted. His hands hardened into tools, his hearing sharpened, his steps became soundless. He could feel the air move when a rat ran across the floor 10 feet away. He could trace the shape of the room with his fingertips in absolute blackness. The cellar taught him everything about patience, about silence, about the subtle difference between stillness and death. He began to listen to the world above as one listens to the sea from the ocean floor. Footsteps, laughter, the clatter of pots, the creak of the boards overhead when someone passed. Through sound alone, he learned the rhythms of the plantation, when the servants rose, when the master slept, when the storms came and the harvest was brought in. Sometimes, when the rats scurried near, he caught them with gentle hands, feeling their tiny hearts race against his fingers. He never harmed them. They were in some distant way his teachers, and always behind every heartbeat and breath there was the image of Colonel Rutledge, all red, faced proud, locking the door that day. The way his lips had curved in disgust as he called Silas a creature not meant to see the light again. That moment lived behind Silas's eyes, the last thing the sun had ever touched in him. Years passed above like clouds moving over a grave. The world changed. Wars whispered on the horizon. Men argued about freedom and rights. But in the cellar, time was a stagnant pool. Silas became a part of it, a relic sealed beneath the floorboards, his body reshaped by deprivation and patience into something lean, precise, and utterly silent. He didn't rage, he didn't pray, he simply endured. By the 5th year, the fear of the dark had turned into reverence. The darkness was no longer an enemy, it was home. His mind, stripped of all but survival, found clarity in the silence. He began to think less of escape and more of equilibrium. He breathed with the cellar, felt the pulse of the earth beneath the stone, and listened to his own heart slow to match it. Then, one day, he stopped counting the scratches. There was no point anymore. Numbers meant nothing in the absence of change. What mattered was waiting, and waiting became his only art. Above, the world forgot him. Rutledge aged and grew bitter, his wealth thinning with the years. Servants came and went. Those who remembered the pale man in the cellar spoke of him in whispers, calling him the ghost under the kitchen, a threat for children who misbehaved. The cellar became a myth, a story even the master pretended not to know. But Silas never forgot, not the faces, not the names, not the sound of the lock turning. When Colonel Rutledge finally died 12 years later, paralyzed, his mouth twisted, his eyes rolling toward the ceiling as though seeing something he could not name, Silas was still there, waiting. He didn't know it yet, but the world above had shifted. The routine that had bound him to life was about to break. The food stopped coming. For 3 days he waited patiently, thinking it was a mistake. On the 4th, hunger crawled back like an old ghost. The 5th day brought silence. No footsteps, no voices, nothing but the deep hum of emptiness above. He pressed his ear against the cold wood of the door and heard only wind. Then, one night, faintly, he heard something new. The creak of the cellar lock, old and corroded, being tested from above. A sliver of faint orange light bled through the seam as the hatch lifted. A voice called down, "Anyone there?" Silas didn't move. The light was blinding, stabbing his eyes like knives. He crouched in the shadows, his breath slow, his heartbeat steady. A man's silhouette appeared in the doorway, holding a lantern. God Almighty. The man whispered, "What's down here?" The lamp's glow reached Silas's corner, catching the glint of his eyes. The man froze, staring at the pale shape crouched against the stone. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Silas rose slowly, his bones creaking like the cellar itself waking from sleep. His voice, when it came, was barely a breath. "Who are you?" The man stumbled back, eyes wide, his lantern shaking. You're still alive." But Silas didn't answer. His gaze drifted past the man to the doorway above, the path he had dreamed of for 12 years. The first breath of real air in more than a decade slid into his lungs, sweet and foul all at once. When the man fled, leaving the hatch open and the lamp burning on the steps, Silas moved. He climbed, and for the first time in 12 years, the pale man beneath the floorboards stepped into the night. The house that forgot to breathe the night Silas emerged was heavy with rain. The fields glistened like dark glass, and thunder moved over the hills like slow, deliberate footsteps. No one saw him step out from the kitchen door, barefoot and pale against the black mud. The house loomed behind him, the old Rutledge home, its shutters trembling in the wind. It had once been the pride of the county, white columns, lanterns, laughter. Now it leaned like a corpse propped upright, every window blind like a sealed eye. He moved through the rooms with a stillness that did not belong to the living. The boards creaked under his weight, and with every sound, dust fell from the ceiling like years collapsing at once. The dining room still held the long table, though the silver was tarnished and the chairs half rotted. On one wall, the portrait of Colonel Rutledge watched its colors dulled by time, its subject preserved in oil and arrogance. Silas stood before it for a long while. "You are gone," he whispered, "but I remain." There was a faint sound from upstairs, a shifting, a cough. Silas turned his head, his ear attuned to the tremor of footsteps above. He followed them up the main staircase, his hands sliding along the banister like he was tracing memory itself. At the top landing, a candle flickered through a half-open door. Inside, an old woman sat in a chair, wrapped in a shawl, her hair thin as spider silk. She was murmuring to herself, a Bible open on her lap. Her voice was cracked but steady, reading aloud as if to someone who wasn't there. When Silas entered, she did not scream. She only looked up slowly, squinting into the dimness. "Is that you, Elias?" she asked. "Come to check on your granny." Silas said nothing. The candlelight found his face hollow and unfamiliar. Her expression changed. First confusion, then dread, then something like recognition. "Oh, Lord have mercy." Her hands trembled. "It can't be. He said you were dead." Silas knelt beside her chair. "No," he said softly. He wished it. She began to pray then, not for forgiveness, but for protection. Silas listened, his eyes unfocused, his mind elsewhere. When she tried to rise, he laid a hand gently on her shoulder. Her breath caught, but he only whispered, "Rest." He did not harm her. He only closed her Bible, folded her hands upon it, and walked back down the stairs. The storm outside deepened. Water streaked down the walls, pooling near the kitchen door. Silas stepped out again into the night and crossed the fields toward the servants' quarters. The buildings were long abandoned, doors swinging, roofs caved, ghosts of laughter still clinging to the air. He stood in the rain until dawn, breathing the smell of the earth, the rot, the faint sweetness of decay. It felt familiar. By morning, the man who had opened the cellar, Elias Mercer, a traveling carpenter hired to repair the estate for auction, returned with the county sheriff. They had ridden all night from town, convinced that what Elias had seen was some fever dream. The sheriff, a stout man named Abram Whitlow, had heard 100 ghost tales about the Rutledge cellar, but he came anyway, if only to quiet the talk. When they reached the house, the storm had passed. The front door hung open. Elias hesitated on the steps, pointing at the mud tracks leading inside. There, he whispered, "See, bare feet." Sheriff Whitlow knelt, studying them. The prints were narrow, childlike almost, but long. Too long, could be an animal, he muttered. Elias shook his head. It spoke. They entered cautiously, pistols drawn. The air smelled of damp plaster and candle smoke. In the parlor, they found the portrait of Colonel Rutledge lying face down on the floor, its frame cracked clean in two. Upstairs, in the widow's chamber, they found her still seated in her chair, her Bible closed upon her lap, her mouth slightly open as if caught mid-prayer. "She's gone," Whitlow said, pressing 2 fingers to her neck, cold. Elias swore under his breath. "He didn't kill her," he said. "He just came back." Whitlow turned. "You mean the man you claim was locked up here 12 years ago, the one supposed to have died?" Elias nodded weakly. "I saw him, pale as wax, eyes like glass." The sheriff sighed. "Then we'll search the grounds." They found the open hatch in the kitchen floor and the rusted chain snapped clean through. The cellar below was empty except for a tin plate, a pile of bones that might once have been rats, and the faint outline of a man's sleeping place against the wall. Whitlow stared at it for a long time, then turned to Elias. "You're sure no one's been living here recently?" "Not a soul," Elias said. "The colonel's estate's been closed since his passing." That afternoon, word spread through the county that something had stirred at the Rutledge plantation. The papers called it nonsense. The townsfolk whispered otherwise. They said the pale man had returned, the one the colonel chained beneath the earth. Children dared each other to walk the road past the property at dusk, listening for footsteps under the soil. But Silas was not there. He moved unseen, traveling by night through the thickets and swamps, following the creek that led toward town. The world had changed in his absence. New fences, new faces, new laws. But people were still the same, fearful, cruel, and curious. He hid by day, feeding on what the woods offered. The moonlight no longer hurt his eyes. A week later, a hunter found strange prints near the old mill pond. Bare feet sunk deep into the clay, toes splayed as if grasping the ground. Around them, the carcasses of 3 raccoons lay drained and pale, as if the blood had been drawn out with careful precision. The hunter told Sheriff Whitlow, who laughed it off as superstition, but the next night Whitlow's dogs vanished from their pens. All that remained were chains snapped open and a trail of wet footprints leading into the fields. The town began to whisper again. Some said a ghost, some said a curse. But an old woman at the market swore she had seen a man walking near the churchyard just before dawn, thin as a shadow, head bowed, his face the color of bone. When she called out to him, he turned, and his eyes gleamed like a cat's. 2 nights later, Elias Mercer disappeared. His tools were found on the road near the Rutledge gate, his lantern still burning beside them. Sheriff Whitlow ordered a search of the woods, but no one found a trace. The rain came again that evening, washing away the footprints, the blood, and the last proof that anything had passed at all. But inside the old house, in the kitchen where the hatch lay open, someone, or something, had begun to walk again. Slow, deliberate steps across the warped floorboards. In the quiet between thunderclaps, the sound was unmistakable. The house breathing, the cellar exhaling, the floorboards whispering under unseen weight. And in the room above, the portrait of Colonel Rutledge, now rehung by some unknown hand, had been turned slightly to the left, as if the man in the painting were watching the door. The coroner's report on the morning of June 18th, 147, Sheriff Abram Whitlow received a sealed letter from the county coroner, Dr. Elias Barrow. The handwriting was uneven, the ink blotched as if the writer's hand had trembled. Inside was a brief message and a folded sheet of parchment stiff with water stains. The message read, "Sheriff, you will wish to see what I have found. The remains at the riverbank are not animal. E. Barrow." Whitlow saddled his horse before breakfast and rode south toward the marshes, where 2 farmhands had reported bones tangled in the reeds. When he arrived, Dr. Barrow was already there, crouched near a shallow pool, his spectacles fogged by the humidity. A shape lay half buried in the mud, a body, or what had once been one. It was Elias Mercer. The carpenter's face was almost unrecognizable. The skin had gone translucent in places, the color leached from it like paper left in the sun. His eyes were open, pale and cloudy, but what struck Whitlow most was the absence of blood. The body was drained, empty as though every vein had been drawn clean. There were no puncture wounds, no signs of struggle, just a strange pallor that made the flesh gleam faintly, like candle wax. Dr. Barrow straightened slowly. "I have never seen anything like it," he said. "The vessels are collapsed, the tissue starved of oxygen, yet there is no decay. It's as though life was extracted without rupture." Whitlow crossed himself, though he did not know why. "Could an animal do this?" "Not any that walks on 4 legs, Barrow said. They carried the body to the small morgue behind the apothecary. That night, under lamplight, Barrow made his report. His notes were methodical, clinical, but the further he wrote, the more his hand shook. He observed faint impressions along the shoulders, symmetrical and narrow, almost like the prints of fingers pressing inward. The heart was shriveled, the lungs collapsed, yet there was no water in them. And when he made the final incision, he stopped halfway through and whispered, "This blood is not dead." The sheriff leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Barrow gestured to the bowl where a small amount of dark fluid had gathered. It glistened faintly, not red but black, and seemed to pulse when the air touched it, as if still trying to breathe. "It resists coagulation," the doctor murmured, "even removed from the body." Whitlow exhaled through his teeth. "Good God, Barrow, are you saying he's alive?" "No," Barrow said quietly, but something he meant was. The sheriff ordered the body buried in the churchyard by morning, but by the time the sexton arrived, the corpse was gone. Only the sheet remained, soaked through and cold as if it had lain all night in water. Whitlow questioned every man in town, but no one had seen a cart, a thief, or a grave opened, and though the sheriff would not say it aloud, he knew who had taken him. That night Whitlow dreamed of the Rutledge cellar. He saw it as it had been described. Stone walls slick with condensation, chains hanging from the beams, faint scratches etched into the mortar like a calendar of suffering. In the dream he stood at the foot of the stairs, staring into the dark, and heard a whisper, "Still beneath you." He woke drenched in sweat, the image burned into his mind. By the week's end the rumors had become fever. Farmers claimed to see a figure walking the fields at dusk, thin, stooped, bare-footed. A boy swore he found his dog drained white and cold near the orchard. Whitlow rode the perimeter of the old plantation each night, pistol ready, lantern swinging. But nothing moved except the wind. It was on the 9th night that he found the trail. Near the east fence where the swamp met the corn rows, the mud bore the unmistakable shape of hands, 2 perfect impressions side by side, pressed deep into the earth as if someone had crawled. And scattered nearby were bones, not human, not animal, but something in between, too long, too thin, the marrow hollow and whistling when the wind passed through. Whitlow followed the tracks to the edge of the property where the old smokehouse stood. Its roof had caved in long ago, the inside dark and reeking of rot. But in the center of the floor lay a single footprint, pressed into the ash, a human foot, narrow and elongated, the skin smooth and white, as if the heat had never touched it. And beside it a handprint. The fingers were long, too long. He turned to leave, and froze. From the shadows a voice whispered, barely audible, "You came." Whitlow raised his lantern. The light caught a shape in the corner. A figure crouched low, its body thin as wire, its skin the color of milk. Its eyes reflected the light like glass marbles. The sheriff's breath caught. "Silas," he said before he could stop himself. The thing tilted its head, curious. "You know the name." Whitlow took a slow step back. "You should not be here." "I was here before you were born," Silas said softly. "I was buried, and you forgot." His voice was calm, too calm. Whitlow aimed his revolver, but the pale man only smiled. "You think you can kill what you left beneath your feet." The sheriff fired once. The sound cracked through the night, echoing off the trees. The figure staggered, but there was no blood, only a dark shimmer where the bullet struck, like light bending around glass. When Whitlow blinked, the figure was gone. The lantern flame fluttered wildly, then died. He stumbled into the open air, heart pounding, rain beginning to fall again. Behind him, the smokehouse door creaked shut. By dawn, Whitlow had sealed his report. He wrote everything down, every detail, every word. He placed it in an envelope and left it with the county clerk, marked to be opened only upon my death. That same evening, his deputy found him slumped over his desk. His skin was white as bone, his eyes wide open, a faint smile on his lips. The physician wrote heart failure, but those who saw the body swore they could still hear breath faintly whistling through his teeth, as if something inside him refused to stop moving. The file remained sealed, and deep in the woods, where the fog clung low to the ground, a pale figure knelt beside the shallow grave of Elias Mercer, pressing its hands into the soil as if searching for warmth. The rain fell harder, drumming against the leaves, and the earth seemed to breathe. Somewhere beneath it, something answered, the archive at Stillwater, autumn 1883. The rain had come early that year, drumming a hollow rhythm on the roof of the Stillwater County Archive. The clerk, a nervous man named Andrew Lang, was cataloging old estate records when his candle guttered out. He muttered a curse, relit it, and returned to the stack of faded ledgers. That was when he saw the envelope wedged between 2 volumes of tax receipts, brittle, yellowed, sealed with a long, dried bead of black wax. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, to be opened only upon my death, Sheriff Abram Whitlow. Lang hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside were 20 pages of notes, written in a firm but increasingly unsteady hand. The first line reads simply, "If you are reading this, I am gone, and what I buried beneath that house was never human." He read on. Whitlow's account began in May 1847, but the tone shifted sharply after the disappearance of the coroner's body. The sheriff described the figure he had seen at the smokehouse, the pale man with eyes that reflected lamplight, the impossible way he moved, the cold that followed him. Whitlow claimed that Silas Rutledge, if that was still his name, no longer aged, no longer bled, no longer died in any human sense of the word. He has become a thing drawn from hunger alone, the letter said. And that hunger is for memory for the lives that forgot him. Lang turned the page. There were sketches, rough charcoal renderings of footprints, handprints, even a face seen only in glimpses. It was elongated, with hollows where cheeks should be and no visible pupils in the eyes. Below one drawing Whitlow had written, "The mouth is wrong. It opens too far." The next page contained the sheriff's final entry, dated July 6, 1847. He is beneath the floorboards again, not the old cellar deeper under the church itself. They built over him thinking stone would hold, but stone does not remember. Wood does. Lang's hands trembled as he read. He could hear the rain intensifying outside, the steady thud against the shutters. The candle flame bent sideways, though no wind touched it. A draft seemed to come from the floorboards beneath the archive desk. He stood quickly, setting the papers down. There was a faint creak, old timber shifting. He told himself, yet the sound was rhythmic, deliberate, like the creak of footsteps moving below. He forced a laugh. "It's just the rain," he whispered, but the noise came again, a slow, dragging scrape, then silence. Lang lifted the candle and crouched near the floorboards. There, between the seams, he saw something pale, a glint of white that pulsed faintly, as though something beneath was breathing. He dropped the candle, hot wax splattered across his fingers, and he jerked back. The candle rolled, came to rest near the open envelope, the flame flickering over Whitlow's last words. "When the hunger wakes again, it begins with light." The flame went out. Lang was found 2 days later by the morning clerk, his chair overturned, his papers scattered. There was no sign of struggle, no broken window, no forced lock, only a patch of floorboards warped and damp as though soaked from underneath. The envelope was gone. For months afterward, rumors spread among the clerks that something moved through the archives after dark. They spoke of footsteps pacing behind the shelves, of pale reflections in the glass of the record cases, of pages found turned to the same entry again and again, Rutledge Estate, 1835-1859. By winter, the building was sealed. The county commissioners moved the records to a new hole upriver, leaving the old archive to rot. But some nights, when the fog rolled down from the hills, locals swore they saw a faint light in the upper window, a candle still burning where none should be. 30 years later, in 1913, the archive was reopened as part of a historical restoration. The new curator, Professor Clara Whitlow, the sheriff's great-granddaughter, oversaw the project herself. She had grown up hearing fragments of the family story, the curse, the cellar, the man who never died. She dismissed them as superstition until she found the property map tucked inside one of her grandfather's journals. On the map, drawn in faded ink, was a line of buildings marked with crosses: the old plantation, the church, the courthouse. Beneath them, a single word written 3 times: below. Clara hired a small crew to excavate the subcellar beneath the old courthouse, just to confirm the foundation. What they found was not stone. At a depth of 8 feet, the workers struck a layer of boards oak, blackened by time. When they pried one loose, a smell of wet iron filled the air. Beneath the boards lay a space barely 3 feet high. A crawl space. In it, the outline of a man, preserved as though embalmed by the earth itself. His skin was the color of ash, his hair white and fine as thread. His eyes were closed. Clara ordered the space sealed immediately and recorded nothing of the find. But that night, she could not sleep. She kept thinking of how the corpse had looked, not dead exactly, but waiting. Its hands were clasped as if in prayer, and beneath its fingertips were faint grooves in the wood. Marks, hundreds of them, 7 per line, days, weeks, years. When she returned the next morning, the boards had been nailed back into place, but the grooves had deepened, as though the fingers had been moving in the dark while no one watched. The official report filed by Clara Whitlow makes no mention of the body. It describes the subcellar as unstable, unfit for preservation. Within a year, she left the state entirely. The new archivist never stayed past dusk. Yet the people of Stillwater whisper still. They say the rain carries a strange echo when it hits the courthouse roof, a low, hollow rhythm like knuckles rapping wood. They say that if you press your ear to the floorboards of the archive hall, you can hear breathing slow, patient, steady. And sometimes, when the lamps flicker just before midnight, a pale handprint appears on the glass of the front door, as though someone is trying to come in from the rain. The Stillwater manuscript. In the spring of 1915, 2 years after the courthouse excavation, a railway worker named Elias Morton found a trunk washed up near the Stillwater Bridge after a heavy storm. The trunk was iron, bound, its lock rusted through, its brass plate engraved with the initials C.W. Inside were papers, hundreds of them damp, curling, their ink blurred by river water, but still legible in parts. When the county registrar received them, he realized they were the private journals of Professor Clara Whitlow, who had vanished without record in October of the previous year. The entries began innocently: notes on restoration, budgets, building inspections, and family genealogy. But after the day of the subcellar excavation, the tone shifted. The handwriting changed, smaller, more cramped, as though the writer were afraid the words themselves might be overheard. July 3rd, 1913. The boards moved again today. The marks are fresh, though I sealed them myself. The others insist the soil is shifting, but the pattern is too precise. 7, always 7. July 9th. The smell has returned. Iron and mildew. The night watchman swears he hears breathing in the stairwell. I told him it was only the wind through the vent shafts, but I know the sound. I've heard it before in my dreams. July 14th. I dreamt of him beneath the church, beneath the house, beneath the courthouse. Always beneath, waiting, watching through wood. July 17th. I went down alone tonight with a lamp. The crawl space was empty. Empty, yet the floorboards pulsed when I touched them, as if they remembered being moved. I think memory is a kind of hunger. The last entry was dated July 19th, 1913. He whispered my name from under the boards. He said he remembers me. After that, the journals contained only loose pages, diagrams of the courthouse foundation, copied estate maps, and a transcribed letter that appeared to be from the sheriff's original notes. One line was underlined 3 times in red ink. He becomes what the walls remember. The discovery of the trunk caused quiet panic in Stillwater. The courthouse was temporarily closed for structural review, but one of the laborers who helped move the trunk, a young man named Peter Lyle, told a different story. He said that when they lifted the sodden papers out, the entire trunk exhaled a damp, sour breath that extinguished their lanterns. Within a month, Lyle had disappeared. That same year, a new construction crew began work on an annex to the courthouse. During excavation, they struck what they first thought was a tree root, thick, pale, and fibrous. But when one worker cut through it with his spade, the root bled. The men fled, leaving their tools where they fell. By the next morning, the trench had flooded, though there had been no rain. The water was red, brown, and viscous. They pumped it for days, but it never seemed to empty. The county officials buried the incident under paperwork and silence. The annex was completed, the ground was paved over, no one spoke of the pale, bleeding root again. In 1920, an anonymous package arrived at the Richmond University Department of Antiquities. It contained a single item, a bound folio labeled Stillwater manuscript. Inside were copied pages from Clara Whitlow's trunk, carefully rewritten in another hand, with annotations in the margins cross, references to local church records, death certificates, and a partial translation of a Latin phrase scrawled on one torn scrap, sub lignis vigilat. He watches beneath the wood. The manuscript was quietly archived under Regional Folklore, Virginia, 19th century. No curator ever signed it out again. But in 1943, during wartime relocation of university materials, the folio was packed with hundreds of others and shipped to a storage facility near Quantico. The manifest listed every document except that one. Its absence wasn't noticed until 1956. Decades later, in 1971, a graduate student named Nathan Brill rediscovered the story while cataloging forgotten archive reels. He was young, clever, skeptical, the kind who laughed at ghost tales and family myths. He decided to make the Stillwater case the focus of his thesis, Cultural Memory and Collective Haunting in Post-Antebellum Virginia. Brill visited the old courthouse, now long abandoned. The building was still standing, though the roof sagged and ivy grew thick across its facade. The interior smelled of mold and iron. The air was colder than it should have been. He noted the warped floorboards, the way dust patterns formed concentric circles near the center of the hall, as if something had been turning slowly beneath the planks. He took photographs, most of which later developed as nothing but white blur. His notes, however, survived. The boards resonate when struck a faint echo beneath, not hollow exactly, but elastic, like tapping skin over bone. Faint odor of metal and ash. Temperature drops 7 degrees near the center of the hall. One of my audio reels picked up a low-frequency hum. Pattern repeats every 7 seconds. Brill stayed 3 nights, sleeping on the courthouse floor with his recorder running. On the 4th morning, local police found his tent collapsed, his notebooks scattered, and the tape still spinning. It captured 6 hours of silence except for one sound, slow breathing, followed by a voice whispering a single word between each exhale. Under, under, under. When the tape ends, there's the distinct creak of a board bending and something wet sliding across it. The recording was entered into evidence, then misplaced when the case was closed as missing person presumed accident. His family never recovered his body. But the janitor who discovered the recorder refused to work another day inside that courthouse. He told a reporter later that he'd seen footprints leading from the center of the floor to the door, bare, pale, and wet, as though someone had climbed out of the ground and walked away. That same night, a freight train derailed 3 miles north of Stillwater. The cause was never officially determined. Witnesses claimed they saw a figure standing in the field as the engine passed, white hair streaming in the wind, unmoving, watching. When rescue teams arrived, they found the ground soft beneath their boots, the soil puckered and breathing like a lung. They say Stillwater sleeps now, its courthouse sealed by rusted chains and a warning nailed to the door, "Do not break the floor." But those who have lived long enough to remember the reign of '59 swear that when thunder rolls over the hills, they can hear it again, the dragging scrape, the muffled breath, the slow counting of 7 from somewhere deep beneath the boards. The reopening of Stillwater by 1983, the old courthouse had been empty for nearly 70 years. It sat like a blister on the edge of town, a relic nobody wanted to touch, though its cracked clock tower still loomed above the trees like a watchful eye. Then, during a statewide effort to restore historic buildings for tourism, The Department of Cultural Preservation ordered its reopening. The project was overseen by Dr. Miriam Kettering, a structural historian from Charlottesville known for her skepticism towards superstitious folklore. Stillwater's locals warned her quietly about the missing student, about the red water, about the breath in the floor, but Kettering laughed. "Buildings don't breathe," she said, "people do." She and her small team arrived that August with blueprints, portable lighting, and a single security guard to monitor the property. For the first 2 days, everything went smoothly. Dust, mildew, wood rot all expected. Then came the third day. The team began removing the warped oak boards in the central hall, planning to replace them with replicas. Beneath the top layer, they found another older, blackened, nailed crosswise over a cavity filled with compacted soil. When one of the workers, Alan Pierce, lifted a board for sampling, a faint hiss came from the hole, not air, not gas. It sounded like breath drawn too long. Kettering noted the odor, iron, decay, and something distinctly organic. She ordered the opening sealed until atmospheric tests could be done, but Pierce had already pocketed a small, curled fragment of wood from the hole, pale, smooth, and warm to the touch. That night he woke screaming. His roommate reported that he'd been scratching at his chest, whispering, "It's under me." He quit the next morning and left town before sunrise. He never collected his final paycheck. Kettering's official report from that week survives a thin stack of typed pages in a university archive, stamped for internal review only. Most of it reads like ordinary site documentation, but one passage stands out. Observed slight vibration in subfloor during temperature drop. Possible groundwater movement, though no moisture detected. Subjective impression of resonance when standing above center of cavity as if heartbeat. Beneath plank, recommend further geological survey. That geological survey never took place because that same night the courthouse lights flickered and died. The guard on duty swore he saw a figure standing in the corridor, tall, thin, its skin the color of wood ash. It turned toward him, and he claimed its eyes were not eyes at all but two hollow knots, smooth as polished oak. When the floodlights came back on, nothing was there but all the boards the crew had removed earlier that day were back in place. Every one of them nailed shut from beneath. By morning, Dr. Kettering was gone. Her equipment remained. Her notebooks ended mid-sentence. Sound beneath foundation, continuous, rhythmic, approximating. The page tore there. The department halted the project indefinitely, citing budgetary complications. Stillwater's courthouse returned to silence once more, but that silence did not last. In 1991, a regional radio host named Frank Dooling aired a Halloween special titled The Stillwater Tapes. It was meant to be a playful local legend feature. He and a friend spent a night inside the courthouse with portable recorders, retelling ghost stories. Halfway through the broadcast, listeners heard something strange, a faint pounding in the background, slow and steady, like someone knocking on a wooden wall from deep underground. Then came a voice, faint, male, and monotone. He remembers the blood. The feed cut out for 41 seconds of static. When it returned, Dooling sounded confused, out of breath, his tone flattened. He ended the show early, saying only, "Do not touch the boards. Please do not." He disappeared 3 weeks later. His co-host left town and refused all interviews. The radio station archived the tapes, but during a relocation in 1995, one reel went missing. The label read, Segment 7 Subfloor Recording. Local myth turned to modern urban legend. Teenagers dared each other to sneak into the courthouse and knock 7 times on the main hall floor. Some claimed to hear whispering beneath. One boy vanished in 1998 after filming a short video for a school project. The final frame of his tape shows the floor warping slightly, as though something heavy shifted below him. Authorities dismissed it as editing trickery, but the tape itself degraded within days, as if the material resisted preservation. One teacher who viewed the footage said it wasn't the movement that disturbed her, it was what she heard faintly in the background, a woman's voice, strained, repeating a date over and over, July 19th, July 19th. In 2003, the Stillwater Historical Society announced a plan to digitize all related materials, the original case files, Professor Whitlow's transcriptions, and the journals found in the river trunk. The digitization was funded, but the project lead, Dr. Owen Hart, reported that the scanned images produced inexplicable distortions. The words on screen shifted, blurred, and in one file, rearranged themselves into sentences not found in the original text. Phrases like, "Under the seventh board, the first remembers, she taught me hunger." Dr. Hart quit the project soon after, telling colleagues he'd started hearing movement in the floor of his office, tapping in groups of 7. He took a leave of absence and never returned. The society quietly buried the project, but by then, the story had leaked online. Message boards from 2006 contained threads titled, "Stillwater Courthouse Real Footage. Anyone heard the breathing file? Under the floor challenge, do not TRY." One clip, allegedly extracted from the missing reel of the radio broadcast, circulates even now. It's short, 17 seconds. It begins with soft static, then a breath, then a phrase whispered in an uneven, rasping rhythm. He watches still. Audio experts have examined it for years, unable to determine its source. The waveform seems to pulse like a heartbeat, oscillating every 7 seconds, precisely matching Professor Whitlow's century-old observations. In 2010, the town of Stillwater was officially declared unincorporated. Most residents had left by then. A few remained farmers, widows, those too old or too stubborn to move. They say the courthouse still stands. The roof caved in years ago, but the main hole remains intact, its boards dark and unbroken. Sometimes, on humid nights, they swear they can smell the iron again. One man, the last living descendant of the Whitlow line, told a visiting reporter that the breathing never stopped. "It just got quieter," he said, "quieter and closer." The Stillwater Excavation Report 2017. In February 2017, a private research group known as the Whitlow Foundation for Historical Integrity purchased the deed to the Stillwater Courthouse grounds. Officially, their mission was preservation to restore a neglected architectural artifact of post-Reconstruction Virginia. Unofficially, their lead archivist, Dr. Adrian Roque, was a man obsessed. He'd published a minor paper in 2011 titled Architectural Recurrence and the Organic House Motif in Southern Folklore, in which he argued that structures sometimes retain the memory of violence. Stillwater, he believed, was proof. Roque's team of 5 arrived on March 3rd. The building had been boarded for decades, its windows shattered, ivy consuming much of the outer wall. They wore respirators, headlamps, and recording devices. A small documentary crew joined them to capture the restoration process, the footage of which, according to official records, was never released to the public. Their first 3 days went as expected: environmental testing, structural mapping, cataloging debris. But when ground-penetrating radar was deployed beneath the central hall, the machine registered an anomaly at precisely 7 feet below the floorboards, a long, irregular mass running the width of the room. Roque marked the coordinates with red chalk and ordered a shallow trench dug. The boards were pried up carefully, their underside slick with black moisture, though the soil beneath appeared dry. As soon as the air touched the cavity, condensation formed on every lens. The team reported a chemical sweetness in the smell, not rot, not mold, but something like decayed honey. The first layer revealed compacted loam mixed with fragments of bone animal, mostly. Beneath that, a second layer, pale strands, interwoven like roots. One technician, Daniel Murr, reached down with a gloved hand to sample them. The strands clung to his palm like spider silk. When he pulled away, they tore cleanly and bled a thin film of translucent fluid. The footage shows Murr staring at his hand in disbelief. Then, very softly, the audio picks up a sound, not breath, not words, something like wood expanding under heat, slow, stretching, deliberate. Later that night, Roque recorded his impressions in the field log. The transcription reads, March 6, subfloor layer contains fibrous tissue consistent with dermal root matter. Origin indeterminate. The team believes it organic, though no decay odor present. Vibration detected in soil at intervals of approximately 7 seconds, unsure if seismic. He pauses for 12 seconds and then whispers almost to himself, "It's still alive." That line was later redacted from the public transcript. Only the unedited footage, retrieved from a backup server, revealed it. By March 9th, 3 of the 5 crew members had requested reassignment. One claimed his dreams were filled with wooden corridors that move like ribs. Another said he heard whispering from the Foundation vents, a woman's voice murmuring, "It's time to feed the memory." Roque dismissed their accounts as fatigue. He stayed behind with one remaining assistant, Lydia Crane, to continue excavation. On March 10th, they reached the anomaly. Beneath the root layer was a cavity, a hollow approximately 6 feet long and shaped unmistakably like a human outline. But instead of bone, what filled it was a lattice of white, hardened material that resembled ossified wood. Embedded in its center was something darker, soft, sinewed, faintly pulsing. The heart, if it could be called that, was still beating. The camera footage freezes their static lines, rippling as though magnetized. The crew's microphones pick up the faintest whisper. He waited. When the feed returns, Roque's voice trembles for the first time. "Lydia, it knows we're here." By morning, Crane was gone. Her personal camera lay in the corner of the hall, lens cracked but still recording. The footage shows Roque standing over the cavity, muttering softly to himself. His words are nearly inaudible, but one phrase repeats, "I understand now. He isn't buried, we are." The rest of the file is corrupted. At timestamp 04/03/17, the audio collapses into a low, rhythmic pulse identical to the hum recorded in 1913 by Professor Whitlow, and again in 1971 by Nathan Brill. It repeats every 7 seconds. Authorities arrived on March 13th after receiving a distress call from one of the Foundation's administrators. They found the courthouse empty except for the partially excavated pit. Roque's field notes were scattered nearby, pages soaked in what appeared to be dark resin that tested negative for any known organic compound. In the pit lay 2 objects, a human jawbone fused into what looked like petrified root. A strip of wood with words etched crudely across it in mirror writing. He remembers the blood. The rest of the structure was sealed immediately, declared unstable, and fenced off under environmental hazard codes. The local government denied all requests for further excavation, yet the data drives from the team's cameras resurfaced a year later on a darknet auction site, anonymous seller, anonymous buyer. Only one short clip from those drives leaked publicly before it was removed. In that clip, the camera pans across the subfloor cavity. The pale, fibrous structure fills the frame. It shifts slightly, as though breathing. Then, faintly, a face emerges human. Like but flattened, its features smooth, eyes sealed beneath translucent skin. It looks like it's listening. In June 2018, a brief entry appeared in the Journal of Architectural Pathology. Stillwater courthouse structural instability due to deep subsoil distortion, possible subterranean gas expansion, site permanently closed. No mention of Roque, Crane, or the organic remains. But those who examined the footage, the few who saw it before deletion, noted a detail missed by most viewers. The boards above the cavity were not randomly nailed. When plotted on a grid, their pattern formed a sigil 7 concentric rings, identical to the diagram from Clara Whitlow's Lost Journal of 1913. The symbol meant one thing: containment. Stillwater sleeps again, its courthouse draped in caution tape and silence. The last note found on Roque's dictaphone ends mid-breath. "If the house remembers, it will rebuild itself." He never clarified what that meant. But 6 months later, satellite imagery of the site revealed faint discolorations in the grass surrounding the courthouse, elongated streaks radiating outward like fingers pressing up from below. When the photo was taken, the courthouse had already been leveled. The return of the pulse. Officially, Stillwater was condemned. Unofficially, it was monitored. In September 2019, a subcontractor with the Virginia Department of Environmental Management, Elias Marin, age 42, was assigned to perform a standard post-demolition soil toxicity report. He arrived on the 19th, logged his coordinates, and noted in his field record, "Ground is uneven, grass pale, center point temperature several degrees warmer than perimeter, mild vibration detectable through soles of boots, consistent, rhythmic, interval, 7 seconds. He dismissed it as a quirk of the machinery at first, an echo from nearby train tracks, perhaps, but that night Marin called his supervisor at 2:17 a.m., voice trembling. The recording of that call survived in the case file. Something's moving under the ground, it's hollow, it's breathing. By morning he was gone. His truck was found parked at the southern fence line, headlights still on, engine still warm. There were prints in the mud, his boots leading 30 feet toward the center of the demolished courthouse lot, then stopping abruptly as though he'd simply stepped into air. No prints led away. 2 weeks later, a graduate intern named Helen Cruz was tasked with cataloging the remaining materials from the Whitlow Foundation's previous dig. Among the archived hard drives, she located a folder labeled Audio Patterns Whitlow 1913. Inside were 14 audio files, most of them corrupted, but one track 07, WAV, opened cleanly. It was 6 minutes long. The first minute, silence, then, faintly, a heartbeat. But when Cruz ran it through an analysis program, she realized the waveform wasn't a pulse at all, it was speech. A form of structured modulation, repeating a single word. Remember? She replayed it, slowed down by half. The voice, if it was a voice, sounded low and resonant, vibrating the speakers until the sound distorted into a bass thrum. In the final seconds of the recording, another tone entered the mix, higher, fragile, a child's voice, overlapping with the first feed. By early 2020, the story reached online folklore circles. Someone claiming to be a former Whitlow technician posted anonymously to an occult research board. The thing under Stillwater isn't dead. It's learned to imitate the memory of those who touched it. Every 7 seconds it reaches through sound, through vibration, trying to find new hosts. The post was removed within hours, but the pattern spread. Users began reporting that after reading the thread, they heard rhythmic knocking through their walls, always at the same interval. The site's moderators dismissed it as coordinated trolling. Yet when one of them, username Iron Spectre, posted a debunking video, viewers noticed something strange in the background. Every 7 seconds, the glass of water on his desk trembled. March 2021, the Stillwater grounds were fenced off for the final time. A new government initiative took over the perimeter, labeled Project Remnant. Documents obtained later through leaked emails suggested the goal was subterranean acoustic stabilization, though no one outside the classified project ever learned what that meant. One declassified photo from early construction shows the night site under floodlights, a barren, circular depression where the courthouse once stood. Workers in hazmat suits appear small against the scale of the pit. At its center, a faint shimmer, a pool of something viscous, black but reflective like tar. Beneath it, the ground seems to bulge outward as if something below were pressing upward. The project was halted after just 12 days. All records were sealed again. The official statement, unstable subsoil and gas release hazard. Unofficially, the workers refused to return. One later told his wife that he'd seen hands in the black pool, reaching up like roots seeking light. Dr. Adrian Roque's dictaphone, recovered during that same month from evidence storage, contained one last unarchived file. The voice is faint but steady, though by this point he was presumed dead. It isn't just memory, it's replication. It builds itself from the residue of us, the sound of our footsteps, our fear, our breath in the dark. Each time it's disturbed, it copies a little more. I think the floorboards were not to keep it in, but to keep it from remembering too much. The audio ends abruptly, followed by a 7-second silence. Then the recorder clicks again, though no one touched it. And in a whisper almost imperceptible, another voice replies, "Too late." Satellite scans from 2022 revealed that the Stillwater site, though fenced and inactive, had begun to shift in topography. The central depression grew shallower each month, as if slowly refilling from below. Grass returned pale, waxy, unnatural, spreading outward in concentric circles visible from above. In infrared imagery, the grass glowed faintly warmer than its surroundings. One botanist who examined samples described them as anomalously fibrous, like something between cellulose and collagen. When cut, the blades exuded a clear, viscous fluid that hardened on exposure to air. Microscopic analysis showed the fluid contained human DNA markers from at least 5 distinct donors. All of them matched missing persons from the Stillwater region. By 2023, local residents began reporting soft rhythmic noises at night, echoing through the earth too slow for machinery, too deep for thunder. The sound traveled through plumbing, through walls, through floorboards. Pets refused to enter certain rooms, and in one case, a man named Caleb Nunn, who lived 2 miles from the old courthouse grounds, reported a voice under the foundation. He told neighbors it called his name, faint but persistent. He said it sounded like his late wife. 3 nights later, Nunn disappeared. His house was found empty except for a chair overturned near the basement door. On the concrete floor below, investigators noted 7 circular stains, dark and symmetrical, leading toward the corner of the room and ending against solid wall. They said it looked as if something had passed through it. An internal memo dated August 2024, circulated between the Department of the Interior and an unnamed contractor, contained this line in its final paragraph: containment perimeter ineffective. Recommend relocation of residential population within 3-mile radius. Rhythmic substrata pulse increasing in amplitude. Estimated event escalation imminent, but the relocation never happened. The funding was cut. The files vanished again. Today, the area is listed on state maps as Restricted Archaeological Zone #1479. No structures remain, no signs mark the land, yet if you stand by the chain, link fence at night and place your hand on the earth, you'll feel it. Every 7 seconds a faint pulse, steady as a heartbeat. And if you wait long enough, you might feel another rhythm answering yours, syncing with it, learning it. It listens still. The Convergence 2025, the first sign that something had changed, came not from Stillwater, but from Richmond. On January 4, 2025, a series of unexplained vibrations were recorded across 5 city sensors, all synchronized to a 7-second interval. At first, analysts believed it to be a pipeline malfunction. Then the amplitude grew, traveling outward, rippling through soil like a buried drumbeat. By the end of that week, 12 separate counties across Virginia reported the same pattern. Someone in the emergency dispatch archive marked it in pencil at the top of a log sheet. It's moving. In a quiet office at the Virginia Historical Registry, a junior archivist named Dr. Mara Kellen reopened the Stillwater file, technically sealed, but never deleted. She was cataloging the old Rutledge estate maps for digitization when she noticed something. The foundation layout of the 1834 Plantation house matched exactly the footprint of the 1891 courthouse. Every wall, every stair, every doorframe built directly over its predecessor. As she traced the plans, Kellen found a penciled annotation in the corner of the oldest blueprint, written in faded script: "He is beneath us, and we are his ceiling." At first she assumed it was some builder's superstition. But when she overlaid the 2019 excavation grid, her hands began to shake. The subsoil anomaly, the living mass beneath Stillwater, was located precisely beneath the kitchen of the original Rutledge house. Exactly where Silas Olbane had been sealed away in 1847, Kellen began combing through the family's correspondences, long since digitized. Buried among the ledgers, she found a journal fragment by Captain Virgil Prout, dated May 3, 1859, the day before his death. The handwriting was strained, jagged, but legible. "I hear him breathing under the boards again. It shakes the nails from the planks. I see the milk turn before dawn, hear the cattle low as if they smell something that isn't there. The cellar eats the sound of my voice. When I call for help, it doesn't echo, it listens." The entry ends with a single blot of ink, as though the pen had been snatched mid-word. Kellen's supervisor dismissed her findings as historical dramatization, but the vibrations continued, subtle, measurable, and rising. She drove to Stillwater herself on the night of February 9th. The place was deserted. The air had that peculiar sweetness that Roque described like dust and honey. When she reached the chain link fence, she felt it instantly, the pulse, faint but strong, moving up through her shoes into her bones. Her watch stuttered, its second hand pausing every 7 ticks. In the wind she heard a whisper not of language but memory. 12 years in dark, 12 years of breath withheld. It wasn't in her ears, it was inside her head, resonating with her heartbeat. She pressed her palm against the earth, and something pressed back. At 11:37 p.m., a nearby weather satellite registered a sudden electromagnetic disturbance, centered precisely over Stillwater. It lasted 4 seconds, a flicker of heat and movement that left a perfect circle of scorched grass 70 feet wide. When the first response teams arrived, the ground was cracked open, not dug, not blasted, but peeled back, as if lifted from beneath by an enormous hand. At the center stood something pale and gleaming in the moonlight, not flesh, not stone, but both. A human silhouette, smooth as bone, rising from the soil. Its surface shimmered like candle wax, pulsing faintly. The face, if it had one, was without features, only the faint impression of eye sockets beneath a translucent layer. Witnesses described it as beautiful and wrong. Its presence generated a low resonance that vibrated the fillings from their teeth. Then it spoke, not in sound but through vibration. The earth itself carried the words, translated by bone and blood into thought. The wood remembers, the blood remembers, you built me again. Panic erupted among the responders. Radios failed, lights flickered. One man, recorded on a body cam later retrieved from the site, can be heard whispering, "It's in the ground, it's under all of us." Moments later, his feed cuts to static. Kellen's car was found half a mile from the site, door open, headlights still on. Inside, her laptop contained a partially written note. "It isn't a haunting, it's continuity. He never stopped expanding." The house was just the first host. Over the following days, seismic readings across the state continued, now radiating outward in measured concentric circles, each pulse identical in frequency and amplitude. By the 14th, reports of breathing ground appeared in North Carolina. Roads cracked, trees listed at odd angles, wells bubbled with warm air that smelled faintly of sap and iron. A rural family near the state line reported that the boards in their living room began to bow upward every 7 seconds, as though something beneath were testing the weight of the house. They fled that night. By morning, the house had collapsed, the foundation swallowed by a clean, circular sinkhole. Inside the hole, emergency crews found what they described as pale root matter, woven through the soil like veins. Archived correspondence from 1859 hinted this was always the intention. In one letter, Sheriff Cunningham wrote to Captain Hayes, "If he was left too long in dark, what came out may not be man at all, but something shaped by us, our cruelty, our neglect. We made the walls his womb. If the earth took that memory, then it is not his revenge we suffer, but his rebirth." At 2:00 a.m. on February 21st, Stillwater vanished from satellite imaging. The coordinates remain, but the topography is gone, replaced by a smooth depression of featureless soil. Every recording device within a mile radius ceased transmitting at that exact moment. 7 seconds later, the pulse resumed, but from beneath Richmond, the entity had migrated. An emergency memo circulated quietly among federal agencies that week. It was 1 sentence long. The structure is no longer localized, it's systemic. Meaning, whatever was once beneath Stillwater was now threaded through the earth itself, connected by roots of memory and sound, by the architecture of every wooden floor, every nail and beam and board that had ever rested above a buried secret. The pale man was no longer a person nor a ghost. He had become a pattern, the pulse of human cruelty echoing forever through the things we build and bury. Today, no one lives within 10 miles of the original site. The fence remains, rusted and bowed by time, but travelers still report strange phenomena when passing that stretch of road. Radios dropping to silence, headlights dimming, a faint rhythm under the wheels that matches the beat of the human heart. And sometimes, when the wind dies, they say they can hear it whisper low and slow from the ground itself. You opened the cellar. The afterword 2025, present in the weeks after Stillwater's disappearance. Official statements described the event as a localized geologic collapse. Satellite archives were scrubbed, names redacted. The crater was filled and seeded with fast-growing pines, their roots deliberately engineered to anchor the unstable ground. But the soil refused them. Every sapling planted there turned a translucent white, its bark soft as wax, its leaves clear as thin glass. Within days they bent inward as if bowing toward something below. A quiet investigation was commissioned under the name Project Hearthstone. Its purpose, to study subsurface rhythmic anomalies along the eastern seaboard. Publicly, it was listed as a seismic calibration program. Privately, it was a hunt not for a creature, but for a resonance. The frequency 7.2 Hz persisted. It moved like a pulse beneath the crust, steady and patient. No one could explain why every seventh day the pattern grew faintly stronger, as though timed to the breath of something enormous in sleep. A memo dated March 9, 2025 reads, "Pattern has shifted north. Tunnels along abandoned railway lines showing structural fatigue. Floors in historical homes bow upward from below. Wooden surfaces sweat clear resin that crystallizes into pale filaments. Do not attempt to burn the material. It releases noise." They called it noise, but what they meant was voice. Recordings taken from the burned resin yielded sounds resembling human speech, played backward and slowed syllables too warped to translate, but repeating at perfect 7-second intervals. A linguist assigned to Project Hearthstone quit after 3 weeks. Her final report, handwritten, contained only one note: "It's not talking to us, it's remembering through us." The ground around Stillwater grew warm that spring. By April, the air shimmered like heat above asphalt. When night fell, faint movement could be seen just under the soil ripples like breathing beneath linen sheets. Local hikers began reporting strange reflections underfoot, as though mirrors were buried just below the dirt. One man described seeing his own face 30 feet down, staring back, pale and expressionless. He never returned to the site. His boots were found a week later, upright at the edge of the old fence, the laces tied neatly in bows. Across the Atlantic, in the British Museum's private archive, a curator noticed something peculiar. A piece of 19th-century pine flooring preserved from the original Rutledge plantation and mislabeled decades ago had begun to sweat. It exuded a clear substance that hardened into thin ridges like veins. When tapped, the wood produced a low hum. The pattern matched the Stillwater frequency. Within a month, museums across Europe reported similar incidents with imported timber, all traced back to a single shipment from Virginia, 1847. Every piece of it had been cut from the boards above Sela's Albane's grave. The pale man had gone global long before anyone realized. Dr. Mara Kellen's name reappears one last time in an internal email from April 28, 2025. Subject: "The pattern is spreading through construction materials, old and new. Anything that once bore weight above suffering carries it now. Wood, bone, even brick dust. It isn't haunting, it's inheritance." Every structure is a possible host. The message ends mid-sentence, followed by an automatic out-of-office reply dated the following day. Her whereabouts remain unknown. In May, residents along the James River began to complain of sounds coming through their walls at night, not rats or wind, but something slower, deliberate. House frames clicked as if breathing. Basement walls bowed outward, then inward again, sighing like lungs. One man recorded it on his phone. At the 17-second mark, beneath the creaks and settling beams, a voice can be heard whispering, "You built me again." The house was demolished 2 weeks later. Workers reported the floorboards were warm to the touch, even after the debris was cleared. A final Hearthstone log dated June 12, 2025 was leaked anonymously to independent researchers. The entry was brief: "Do not disturb subsurface rhythms. They respond to attention." Every repetition is replication. The author's name was redacted, but the signature initial was M. K. That summer, as heat swelled and the cicadas screamed through the trees, something curious began happening in the small towns surrounding the vanished valley. Nails rusted overnight. Floorboards shifted imperceptibly, aligning towards Stillwater. Dogs refused to cross wooden porches. And in the attics of old homes, fine dust began to fall not from decay, but from inside the beams. Under magnification, each particle was revealed to be a perfect replica of human skin, translucent and empty. When burned, they released the same 7-second hum. By autumn, the hum was everywhere, in the faint tremor of air conditioners, in the wooden pews of churches, in the low resonance of train platforms. An inaudible rhythm that every child seemed to feel before the adults did. Teachers in one county noted students tapping their pencils in unison, unaware they shared the same beat. No one has proven a direct link, but the pattern endures. It is in our architecture, our foundations, our inheritance of sound and shape. It is what happens when memory becomes material. The final surviving note from Dr. Kellen's digital drive, decrypted months later, contained one line of text, repeated 12 times: "He does not sleep. He grows." Then a single photograph, blurred, colorless. A paneled floor, split down the center, something pale pressing upward through the crack. If you ever find yourself in an old house, the kind that creaks as though it knows your name, listen closely between the intervals of silence. If the rhythm beneath your feet matches your heartbeat, step back, because it's not the house settling, it's remembering you. They say the pale man was buried and forgotten, that Stillwater is gone. But memory is never gone. It migrates, it builds new walls. And sometimes, when the wind cuts low through the trees, you can hear him whisper what he whispered to the first man who sealed him beneath the floorboards in 1008:147, "You are made of me now." So when the boards creak tonight, don't look down. He's already looking up.